So welcome everyone. On behalf of Foremost Pro and Microsoft, we welcome you to this webinar, which, as you can see on the screen, is appropriately named Best Practices to Future-Proof Your Non-Profit with AI. AI being the buzzword, and obviously there's lots of good things, lots of good context and information around AI. And what we'll try to do today is to give you a bit of an unlock of what that might mean.
So hello, my name's Phil Kameen. I'm a technical and solution architect at Foremost Pro. That means is that I generally do problem solving. We use the Power Platform. So that's a number of tools that help us build software much quicker than if we were, for example, had to create websites from scratch and databases from scratch. So we have a lot of sort of components in that world, and a lot of the components these days are actually AI components, and they slot in very nicely because Microsoft has spent a lot of time trying to work out how this stuff fits together. So we're going to be giving you a rundown of some of that stuff today.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. And I will pass over, although not listed on the slide deck, Brian, in not any less important. Please make your introductions.
Hey, thank you for that, and thank you for having me on the call today. Seems like we have a fantastic turnout, and I know everyone is anxiously awaiting you to start the presentation. But my name is Brian Allen, and I'm from Microsoft's Tech for Social Impact, which is Microsoft's business unit that focuses on the nonprofit sector. So we partner with partners like Foremost Pro to bring these type of webinar and other events to you. So delighted to be here, and I'll turn it back over to you, that you can continue the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. And lastly, as people probably already read by now, I am the facilitator, or sales or commercial or whatever you want. So the non-technical arm of this operation. Try to keep the clever people, Phil and his team, on the straight and narrow when we're delivering our clients' projects and all good things, and making sure that clients get the answers they need as quick as possible. So before we move on to some really, really important stuff, I'll just point out we will be sharing the slide deck after this webinar and a recording, so you can pass it around to your colleagues and friends who may be interested. And by all means, the Q&A is now hot and awaiting your questions. So feel free to throw anything in there as you see fit. Right, Brian, TSI. Tech for Social Impact. What is it all about?
Yes. Thank you for this. I mean, as I talked about at the onset, Tech for Social Impact is a relatively small group inside of Microsoft that focuses on helping Microsoft achieve its mission of ensuring every person and organization on the planet achieve more. And what that means for us is that we enable our partners to bring stability to the nonprofit sectors by providing discounted and granted software to nonprofit organizations. So if you're an eligible 501(c) and you're interested in accessing Microsoft technology solutions, whether it's Azure, Dynamics, or Modern Work, there's a process for you to register the Microsoft nonprofit program. And once you're approved for that eligibility, you're then able to access discounted and granted software. As the slide indicates, we have a model, a new business model. It's a social business model. It's predicated on 4 particular pillars. Capacity building, meaning that we're bringing skilling and other resources to bear to nonprofit organizations. We work through a partner ecosystem. So partners like Foremost Pro US are very important to us in us attaining our mission. We have a social investment model, which means that every dollar generated above the cost of goods is plowed back into the nonprofit program to provide nonprofits with the discounted in our free software from Microsoft. And then we want to make sure the technology is affordable and accessible, meaning that the discounted program by which nonprofits can access Microsoft 365 solutions and other solutions for up to 75% off of the commercial list price. So how important is nonprofit to Microsoft? This slide kind of sets that up, and you can see that to date we've provided about $4.7 billion in discounted and granted software, which is a staggering sum. We operate globally, and we want to make sure every nonprofit organization out there that's eligible has the ability to access discounted and granted software from us. For our employee giving program, employees have donated about $250 million, and that includes a matching component from Microsoft. And the last bullet on the slide is that there are about approximately 377,000 nonprofit organizations accessing software from Microsoft or discounted and granted software. That number is actually around 425,000 organizations worldwide. And our aim, obviously, is to grow that to touch 1 million organizations around the world.
So like the pace of AI, so does the nonprofits you benefit. So yeah, no sooner is a slide created than it's out of date, which is really great to see.
Yes,
So that's very
awesome.
good.
Yeah, and I think this might be the final slide, but it sets up the types of software available to nonprofits from Microsoft. And you can see nonprofits can access Business Premium up to 10 free seats. After the 10th seat, it's $5.50 per user per month. There are other solutions in the Dynamics of BizApp suite that nonprofits can access. We're up to 75% off. And then we do provide nonprofits with a $2,000 annual Azure grant so that they can try out those workloads, cloud workloads, or start their journey and migrate to the cloud. So small sample of the solutions available to nonprofits. Almost any commercially available SKU from Microsoft is available to nonprofits at a discounted price.
Fantastic, Brian. Thanks. And although not on here and not necessarily direct as a discount, but the Microsoft partner program allows us to leverage some really great incentives for companies, organizations implementing Microsoft tech stack technologies. So there's the sort of low code side of things, dynamic CRM. Obviously, that's quite hotly used by a lot of charities for sort of donors and that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of incentives that we can also leverage, or a good partner will be able to leverage for you from Microsoft, which not only sort of offsets the cost of implementation, but potentially paves the way for future development. So although not on there, no less important, I think. I think the final slide there, Brian, just really sums it up, doesn't it? Certainly for the AI side of things.
Absolutely. Microsoft is committed to AI, and we want to make sure that nonprofit organizations have access to AI tools to help them achieve those mission outcomes that they are seeking to attain. So we feel strongly about it and working through partners again to make sure that organizations can access our AI suite of products, including Copilot, but there are other products out there as well that in our stack that we're equally committed to.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, fantastic. And as touching on partners, obviously a lot of this can't be done without the partners, which obviously is match made in heaven, I think. And as we are a Microsoft partner, maybe just touching on a little bit about Formers Pro. So Formers Pro is now just over 13 years old, which is quite a journey since we first started in 2012. We still have the same ethos, I think, that we first started with, which was a desire to really support the charity and NfP sector using the technology available from Microsoft really to do good. The first client, which was a very well-known blood cancer charity called Anthony and Nolan, came on board with us and trusted us with their initial move from on-premise Dynamics to cloud, which was fantastic. And I've now lost count, Phil, and I'm sure you probably already have that number in your head somewhere of how many projects we have since delivered to them.
Many.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The good thing is that they still trust us today with all of the projects that they're undertaking in the Microsoft tech stack, which is great. We have the number on the screen, probably the underestimation in terms of the number of people we have working with us, but we all share that same ethos and passion for helping the NfP and charity sector. A lot of the staff within Formers Pro are, I would coin the phrase, clever, nice people. We're an organization that really is more technical than it is sales. So, but we all have our crosses to bear. So anyway, so that's Formers Pro. We are now 2 designations from a Microsoft solution designations perspective. One is in BizApps, which is very much nested in what we're talking about today. The other is in data and digital Azure. So a very clever set of people that we have working for us, and I'm very fortunate to be working with them as well. On to today's agenda, and I'll just quickly cover these. You can read them as well. But why is now the right time for nonprofits to adopt AI? And you might be asking, well, especially when we're literally just digitizing some real basic operations. We will come on to that later, and it's not as scary as you might think. Phil's going to go through some fundraising and in operations impact, so actually some use cases of how we can use this and how you can use this, and perhaps how you're already using it. Very much put anything in the chat that you say you're using, whether that's good or bad. We'd love to hear about it and have an open dialogue on it. How to start without feeling overwhelmed. doesn't mean crying. That just means where do I start and figuring out what is the sort of first port of call. And we'll come on to that in terms of what we feel is a sensible way forward. It says Q&A at the end, but Q&A should be throughout. So if there are questions,
throughout, absolutely.
We can obviously do that. There is actually one question which I will answer. Is there a non-profit pricing and on AI tools such as Copilot? And the answer is yes. What we will do as we send out the slide deck is we will send out some non-profit costs for the RRP pricing on certain Copilot SKUs, which are the licensing. And I would say at this point, actually, and we will get onto it later, but some organizations already have access to certain AI Copilot, in this case, features, or have got the licenses available that they may not be aware of. And I'll give a use case on that later, but that's something to come back to.
Here we are talking about AI. Everybody's always talking about AI, it seems, at the moment. The world is changing fast, and technology particularly. Dialed into a call this morning about some new releases that Microsoft are making in the next sort of couple of months. It was spinning in terms of the amount of effort and amount of changes that are going into a lot of these AI tools. And as a techie, it's very exciting, obviously, always to play with new stuff. But there's a lot of real implementation, sort of detail now in how it works. And more excitingly than just being able to do something, a lot of the new AI stuff is more testable and is able to explain what it's doing. And so there's elements of the ethics of AI, which is something that Microsoft are very, very strong with. So why go with AI? I mean, tech is clearly, it's no longer a nice to have. It may be your organization at the moment is doing something with potentially tools like Excel or an older version of CRM. But what we're sort of we're discovering is that you're being asked to do more with less, and particularly in the non-profit space. And so what we're trying to do here is with AI is hopefully get AI in the corner. Most of what AI can do at the moment, you probably think to yourself, well, I can do that. And that's kind of the point, really. And so what we're trying to illustrate here is that AI is able to do what you can do, but scale it up. So it might be you've seen demos of AI, for example, responding to an email and responding in a particularly nice way, and you're going, well, that's fine, I can do that. But the reality of it is that AI can do that at such scale so that it'll be responding to 1,000 emails in an hour, which is obviously something that you can't do. So we've got a couple of examples here. Facebook campaign. So it might be that some of you use marketing tools at the moment, and something you will have heard of is A/B testing. And so that is when you send out emails to people, you send out two different ones, a version A and a version B, and they're subtly different. And what you're doing is you're looking for the type of responses you get to A, and are those different responses? Are they more or less than B? And so we have an example here, a New York-based nonprofit charity called Water, and they used AI to optimize its Facebook campaigns. And it increased the conversions numbers there up by 32%, which is obviously a huge gain for an organization from a fundraising perspective. And the way they did that is they generated a number of different Facebook ads across more than 1,000 permutations, different emotional sentiments, imagery, and narratives. And this approach allows them to pinpoint precisely which stories and which imagery were most powerful for different age segments and different genders. So again, it's A/B testing, but taken to the next level. Email campaigns, the next example, and that's UNICEF in Australia. And they managed to reduce the number of emails they were sending by 15,000. If you're, currently using MailChimp or even, sort of any of the Microsoft tools, that it does cost you in order to be able to send out those emails. So if you can utilize AI to produce less emails, but you're getting an uplift in revenue because you're looking more closely at the type of data that you're getting back, then that's, it's a very powerful and a very, strong answer. Particularly, I'm sure your CAOs and your CTOs are very excited to be able to do something like that. So there's, two very different tactics in terms of how you're going to use AI and why you might want to use it sort of straight away. And that's one of the strengths, and I suppose, but a little bit of a weakness sometimes when you're discussing AI. We mentioned earlier in terms of Andrew was talking about being able to sort of use Copilot, focus more on what was happening and let the AI take up the slack. In the UK, I use the expression donkey work. all the boring jobs that you're not interested in doing, that take you a lot of time and really, take away from the enjoyment of your job. If you can hand those off to AI, then that's a win for you, and hopefully a win for your organization as well.
And there's lots of AI tools around. Like I can see in the meeting chat, lots of people have sent their wonderful AI note takers. Otter being a particularly popular one. So although we're obviously talking about the Microsoft tech stack here and that sort of thing today, there's so much available to use. It's it's about trying to figure out which one is the right one.
We also run an AI Academy at Foremost Pro. That happens once a month, and we discuss various AI tools. It's not always Microsoft-based tools that we discuss. We did a chat just a week or two ago. We were talking about all the other various free tools you could use. So if you're interested in, if you're not necessarily in the Microsoft space, feel free to check that out.
But yes,
yeah.
yes.
But we're certainly going to be talking about the Microsoft tooling today, because we're talking about what we could do here. So we mentioned donor engagement. We talked about A/B testing just a second ago. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now, because we're going to try and dig into a bit of the detail, the two sides of kind of the marketing system fence, if you like. And what I mean by that is that we have, Microsoft now produce a marketing tool, and it's called Customer Insights Journeys. And they have a secondary part of that, also available as part of the same licensing, called Customer Insights Data. And so what happens is that what traditionally was a marketing tool, Customer Insights Journeys now does. And what that does is it allows you to segment your data. And so that means analyzing data points, looking at donation history, engagement levels, and breaking off your donors into potentially different categories. So, for example, active donors, one-time donors, major gift prospects. And once you've started to get information back from them in terms of when you're trying to contact them through SMS or all the different channels that are available to you through Customer Insights Journeys, that information comes back into your system, and it's all based, this stuff, on the Power Platform, which is a big chunk of what we do here at Foremost. And then we can take that data and we can move it across into something called a CDP. And that stands for a Customer Data Platform. And the Customer Data Platform we're going to talk about is the Customer Insights Data. And that allows you to collect that information and unify it with lots of other different data sources. So, for example, online donations, event registrations, other bits of data about your donors that's not necessarily available within all of your Power Platform systems. And once you've been able to converge that all into a single profile, you can then feed that information back into Customer Insights Journeys. And so once you create this virtuous cycle where one piece of data feeds into another, and hopefully that allows you to, create really powerful user insights on that donor data. And then you can start to build out more personalized messages that align with your donor's interests, for example. And that hugely increases the likelihood of engagement and continued support. Yeah. So finally, I guess finishing up on this, really, sort of these data-driven insights will hopefully allow you to, you can then allocate your resources more effectively. You'll be optimizing your fundraising effort.
And I think a question earlier was about not only AI, but certain licensing offers for the not-for-profit. And typically you'd have a $1,700 a month customer insight license with Microsoft. If you were a commercial entity, typically you're looking at sort of 60% roughly discount on that costing for the NfP sector. So, a very powerful tool to do both the data and the journeys of your donors and your organization's touch points, but at a fraction of the cost.
And I think Customer Insights Journeys, Customer Insights, broadly speaking, is also available. If you're a Power Platform user, you also get an additional level of discount, I think. So, yeah, it's
an attached license. Yeah, there's an attached license. If you've got a certain qualifying base license for Microsoft. So what you might find is actually this spurs, in the wider context, or spurs a conversation about licensing, which we may come on to in a bit, but it's a good idea to look at what you actually have got licensed, and a good partner will identify where there are opportunities to attach licensing to your tenant so that you don't have to pay the full price, even for not-for-profit pricing, that is.
Yeah, hugely, really big savers. So the tools to hand. So D365 and the Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit. And you might have seen some of this in some of the slides that Brian was running through earlier. D365 is it's a broad term, really. I mentioned the Power Platform. The Power Platform is everything that all of these Dynamics tools, and that's what the D in D365 tends to stand for. And the Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit is also, because all of this stuff sits out there in the cloud, all underpinned by something called a database. So I won't go into all the technical stuff, but that database is something that has another terminology, lots of terminology here, called the common data model. And the common data model is a means of holding this information. So if you're not a big techie, think of them effectively as big Excel sheets. You might have an Excel sheet with all of your accounts or organizations in it, and you might also have a sheet which has got all of your contacts in. And then what you do is the system is able to link the one accounts, if you like, across onto your contacts. And then when you extend this out, there is also a data model specifically for nonprofits. And that starts to include items such as, we've got it here, we've got donor commitments, designations. So that's to say, specific purposes or projects for which your donations are designated, transactions, awards, disbursements. These are all available in this common data service specifically for nonprofits. So huge amount of tools that are available and all part of this Power Platform set of tools and environments. One of them that unfortunately has just been recently retired is called fundraising and engagement. I don't know if anybody's on the call using fundraising engagement. I'd love a hands up or a thumbs up, or it'd be interesting to know where you are with that. Great, Vivian, thank you. Although it's been retired, it doesn't mean, because it sits on top of the Power Platform, and that's this base thing I keep talking about, it means that even when it's retired, it's not suddenly going to stop working. Technology moves on, but the great thing about most of these Microsoft tools is that even when items are retired or no longer necessarily supported, they don't just stop and fall over. And one of the great things about fundraising engagement is that here at Foremost Pro, we've been working with it for a little while. And so we've got a good level of experience in terms of being able to take care of it as well. So with that in mind, we've also got our own version of a not-for-profit tool. So we've got a little quotey section over here on the right-hand side, and we're going to just talk about that now.
Before we move on, Phil, actually quite a good question in the chat. If you want to just pop back a slide for me.
Yeah, sure.
So the tools you're talking about, do they interface with our database, or is it in place of the nonprofit's database?
They work with it, very much so. So the great thing about the Common Data Service is that it's something you can build on and you can extend. So I mentioned, this accounts sheet, for example, it's not fixed. If you want to add extra columns, if you think about it, sort of a way of storing data, then you can do that very easily, and it's very extensible. And there are lots of processes and sort of control methods and governance allow this to stay in place. So you're not going to lose data when you bring in, for example, the common data model for nonprofits. So it's controlled. It's not a chaotic sort of system where things suddenly disappear and never come back.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I was going to say, if Julie or anyone else for that matter, it's a really good question, wants to talk about it through in more detail, maybe on a case-by-case basis, then feel free to reach out to us and we'll arrange a call. Because these are sorts of questions that are regularly asked, Julie, so you're not alone, and there'll obviously be some good information that we can help you with. Does the Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit integrate with Renkst? And can you use a Mac-based computer, which is our case, as an education system? That's a good question. So I'm not sure whether you've come across that, Phil.
A very broad answer. Assuming your system, the system has a level of connectivity, and I mean, for example, the technical term is an API, then we can connect to it. And it might be that if it sits on the cloud, or if it would be able to sit on the Microsoft Cloud, then we can actually have that data appear within the Power Platform but the data still stays where it is. So I won't go into all the technical details because it's a bit much really. There's normally a way of integrating these things. One of the key items within the Power Platform is something called Power Automate. And anybody who's done some level of automation with these kind of tools has seen there's lots of things called connectors, and those connectors then allow you to talk to these different systems. So I would put pretty good money on the fact that we would be able to connect to that data and then hopefully utilize it. And then the cool thing about it is then you can utilize that information as if it were part of your own system.
Yeah, but good question, Angela. And it sounds like it's something that, again, if you need a conversation around it, we can certainly be your sounding board.
Yeah,
that.
definitely.
Thanks.
Definitely. We're onto products. We're onto the product that we produce. So Flex NfP, obviously not for profit, it can be used to manage donor stewardship, fundraising, gift management. And so it's a really suitable solution if you want to move away from potentially you're using spreadsheet-based systems into this more managed solution. And this sits again on top of the Power Platform. So in terms of licensing, there is a Microsoft Sales license that's required. So that gives you access to all sorts of agentic AI that's available within Sales. And so that can do clever things like be reaching out to emails automatically, checking the nature of your leads, checking the kind of data that's required behind them. But we've also got all this extra good stuff that we've been able to put on. So we've got gift aid declarations. I think that's probably less important for our US customers. I know there is an equivalency, but obviously it would be done with the US government rather than the UK government, which is what HMRC is. But with this functionality in mind, I understand that we would be able to probably modify it if we wanted it to fit that circumstance. So that's always a possibility. It is a customization, but that is the nature of the systems we produce. We also have a regular payments module within here. So, if you wanted to set up, record different forms of regular income, you can then use it to drive renewals of regular payments and manage when it's time to end or cancel those regular payments. So there's lots of great stuff within our own product. It's definitely worth talking to us about, I think.
Thanks, Phil. And you mentioned about the sales license required. Like all things, products do require licensing. The good thing about software as a service is that you can do it on a monthly basis, and generally, depending on the commitment, you can end them when you need to. In terms of the sales license, again, just harking back to the sort of support that Microsoft offer, sales professional licenses is about 75%. So it's on the upper end, I think, Brian. Forgive me if I'm wrong here, but for licensing on not-for-profit pricing is about 75% reduction over the commercial. From a almost pro licensing perspective, because lots of people will think about that, we're actually offering at the moment the licensing for the actual product for free to non-for-profit and charity organizations. So essentially, if you already have your D365 qualifying sales license, whether that's non-profit or not, you can actually take our solution, and there are no ongoing licensing costs for that for now. There is a couple of questions, so let's see if we can go through them. But Eric Gardner says, what are the AI capabilities for physical security in a soft target non-profit that has collections? That is a good question. I'm assuming it's not physical in terms of bouncers on doors, but actual security elements that AI can help with.
Okay, in terms of that's an interesting question. I mean, where you're taking on board collections, and do you mean, I would assume, collections, online collections, or are we actually talking about physical things? That would be the question. Eric, I'd love to have a chat with you about this, see what we have. I think that's
Okay, but we can always reach out and touch base on that after the call. Fantastic, thanks. There's a few AI Otter records going off, and I think that's it for the questions for the moment.
So let's move on to actual use cases. So we've got, sort of how are we actually going to do this? So, and what are we going to, how are we going to use this stuff? So we'll start with, smarter fundraising with AI. Imagine being able to sort of understand your donors better than before. So, we mentioned this in the previous slides. What we're trying to do here is build up a picture in data of how things happen. And because we're going to end up with big volumes of data, and we're hoping that the data is of good quality, then that allows us to to utilize 365 Dynamics and AI, and you can start to segment your supporters, for example, by behavior, and start to predict who's most likely to give and personalize campaigns that really resonate with them. So, for example, imagine reaching out to a long-time donor as they're just considering stepping away and rekindling that connection with a message that feels personal and timely. There's a big chunk of a number of agents now that are being produced by the Microsoft technologies that are able to do this in a fantastic way. No more sending out emails based on templates and filling out first name, last name, and maybe a tiny fact. Now the actual emails are going to be produced by an AI, and they'll have, some level of knowledge of that user. An important thing to know when AI is being used for these kind of jobs, it would be terrifying, of course, if the AI wasn't able to give you some level of confidence about how it was doing this stuff. So pretty much every time an AI does something, and this has been true of AI for many, many years, it gives you a confidence factor, and it goes, I'm 100% happy with what I've done here, or I'm only 60% happy with the kind of output I've given. And that's really important, because this then allows you to put a human in the line of processing. And so where an AI thinks it's not getting it right, then it allows a human to step in and go, okay, we need to correct something, or we need to make a change. But where an AI is 100% happy, or certainly more than 95% happy, then it means it's going to be putting out emails that aren't nonsense and aren't going to be detrimental to, your organization. Very, very powerful. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of this technology now is starting to get to the point where it's able to give you these kind of this understanding of how it's worked and why it's done something, which is really important, obviously. AI tools like chatbots and email automation can manage this kind of outreach at scale. Just like I was saying earlier, it's a lot of demos. It shows just one email happening. The reality is that this is happening on a huge scale. And once you start to build your data up, then of course it's this virtuous cycle of hopefully you're reaching more and more people and engaging with more people. Streamlining operations. So we talked about sort of the donor-facing side of the organization. What's equally as important is making sure that everything within your organization is being taken care of too. And so, not just about raising funds, making your organization run more efficiently. So think about automating reports, cutting down on manual data entry. There's a huge part now of the sales tools where it's able to have an issue, you have a problem. The AI will actually look at what you've done and then suggest that, for example, here's a knowledge base that means you can then share that information with other parts of your organization. So very powerful. You could simplify your volunteer scheduling, for example, with AI. So instead of, your volunteer manager having to take care of lots of volunteers, which can be a little bit like herding cats, spend time, instead of playing with spreadsheets and stuff, they can move on to doing more interesting things in a way that hopefully allows them to take their job forward. And I use the expression donkey work, jobs that no one likes doing, give them to the AI, big chunks of those jobs, and AI is able to do means of categorization, all those sort of things that ordinarily it would take a person to do, which can be a real slog, particularly at scale, can now be taken care of in AI. And great. And, kind of a last but not least, we mentioned in one of the questions earlier how potentially you can actually have data from other systems available to you within your D365. And that allows you to do jobs with automation. And so when I say jobs, I mean your HR information can be available to you through automation. Some of your finance information, if appropriate, can be available for your automation. And by that, it's also available for your AI, and that can be very powerful. So hopefully, you become working smarter, not harder. And, kind of last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about reporting. AI is great about bringing together data from multiple sources and turning it into clean and accurate reports. And I think, Andrew, we talked before, didn't we, about Power BI?
Yeah, we were talking about Power BI, and I think although it's not technically sat in the bucket of AI, I think because all of this sits on the Power Platform and Power BI reporting is so rich, you can sort of fish into different systems. We're not suggesting that you up sticks tomorrow and move all of your platforms over that you have to Microsoft. And actually, with the tool set that Microsoft provides, especially with the Power BI reporting, if it's cloud-based, generally it'll be quite straightforward to hook into, and then you can report on data from different sources. That might be, a different system than the one that you have all your donations and stuff on, but it allows you to bring the data together and make, informed decisions. And I think that's all we're all really looking for is, well, I need to know all of what's going on in my organization so I can make an informed decision, and reporting allows you to do that. There was a question earlier about, is it just going to be this presentation just focusing on donations? And of course it's not, because in reality, there's lots of you that aren't going out and getting the donations in. You're doing a lot of the legwork, Phil, not donkey work, and that's not, no less important, because obviously charities and organizations that you guys run won't work without you. So so Power BI is really good.
Yeah, well, this is it. We mentioned the Power Platform, and sort of it's really easy to sometimes think about the Power Platform as this one big sort of thing that you have to take the whole thing or nothing, but it's not the case. Power BI is a tool that you can use separately. Power Automate, the automation engine I mentioned earlier, is something you can take separately, and most of them you can bite little chunks out if you want to. And once you've got that data and the data is clear and your AI is available to then you can start building models, and the AI can start to make some level of prediction. So with that, it means that instead of reacting the whole time, you're actually anticipating and hopefully adapting your organization in a much smarter way.
Yeah, fantastic. There's a good question actually. Do you have an article or a link that details how to use AI in the streamlining of operations? Now, I think that's more actually a conversation. There's probably lots of articles around, but I know from using the Copilot features within Dynamics CRM, for example, it is constantly offering summaries. It's constantly offering suggestions and things like that, which you can take notice of, or you can't. But actually, I think if I look at it, I've actually sort of become a little bit blind to what the AI is actually doing for us, because I almost now expect that level of assistance. And so I don't know whether you found that, Phil, but my day to day in the commercial world is ultimately liaising and being able to make sure I've remembered all of the previous conversations and that sort of thing. And there's a great feature which I use regularly, and my operation, day-to-day operation, is I need to remember all the conversations I've had previously, which is humanly impossible. However, by tracking all of the interactions, with our clients and prospects, it'll give me a great summary, and it will highlight the things that really need to be sort of called out. So that is a good question. I don't know whether there are articles or links, but if there are, certainly our marketing team will be able to send them out.
So we have a Copilot user, Phil, and wants to know what you'd recommend to identify hallucinations.
The key thing is sort of which Copilot you're using is probably a first question. But you can, like with all sort of chat programs, fundamentally, you can say to them, please ensure that you don't give me hallucinations. And depending on sort of the other parts of the tooling you use, so for example, if you were to use Copilot Studio to create your own Copilot, your own agent, you can specify which kind of knowledge sources to use and tell it not to do anything other than utilize knowledge. So there's a lot of different ways you can hit in order to make sure that your AI is not going to produce hallucinations. I think I've heard a number of people say we don't like to call them hallucinations anymore. We like to call it bad grounding. And grounding is the terminology that we use when we're sort of giving an AI a set of knowledge. But it's certainly be interesting to find out which part of Copilot you're using and where you may have had issues with it.
There's another question actually, which is define hallucination, and you may have just touched on that in terms of grounding.
Yes.
But could you just give a good summary of what is an hallucination?
So a hallucination is where an AI, the way generative AI works, and we've been talking about AI as this one sort of kind of thing, if you like. AI is lots of different very clever programming techniques fundamentally, and the latest one that's come out in the last couple of years is this idea of generative AI. And what happens is the AI, it takes any information you give it and it looks at all of the information that it's been trained on, and it finds the next most potentially the next most word that fits if you like. So it's, you know, it's very clever. There's lots of programming involved in it, but what it's doing is it's finding the next word in the sentence. And under certain circumstances, of course, if you're simply asking a question and the AI is just looking at what is the next word, does it make any sense? Sometimes what it does is it goes and it finds a word that takes it off and ends up coming up with fundamentally untruths. And that's why it's referred to now these days more as bad grounding. And it's certainly, I think, something that happens less and less through all the different tools. So Copilot uses a number of different these language models under the hood, and they are available to much less likely to produce hallucinations. But there is always a way and a mean of trying to break these systems. And generally, when we're the agents that we would produce with Copilot and the ones that are available to us in, for example, D365, much less likely to do hallucinations because they're very much controlled in terms of what their grounding is. So that's why we get hallucinations.
Yeah, that's great, Phil. And I think there might be, and it might be something that can be investigated further, but I think there are also different modes for Copilot as well. So if you're using maybe a creative mode, it may be more likely that you get these hallucinations. And then I think you can switch to a bit more of a balanced mode, I think. Phil, you maybe touched on it more.
I think a lot of those switches more recently have disappeared from the later versions. There used to be a creative and a balanced and I think different view. I think the move towards more responsible AI, and that's the concept of having ethics within AI and an AI that's able to give you a reason why it's come up with the answer, has meant that a lot of that stuff, I think, is probably going to end up disappearing, I would have thought, as we have a lot more control. And a Copilot, for example, is always being managed. So, for example, ChatGPT, I won't say there's absolutely no control over it. If you're using a Copilot, then it's being managed through any answer it gives goes back through effectively another AI that's checking to see whether or not it's talking nonsense or coming up with, mistakes or what have you.
Really interesting. There's lots of misconceptions or common misconceptions, I think, around AI, isn't there? Some legitimate, but I wonder if there's any misconceptions that you encounter in the non-for-profit sector or what they might need to consider.
This is it. How are we going to start this, really? Hey, Andrew, how do you eat an elephant?
On the basis that I'm a pescatarian, I will only eat little fishies. But if I were to eat elephant, how would I eat an elephant?
You'd eat it very slowly.
Okay, excellent.
Oh dear.
The dad jokes, very good. Showing
our
age.
Dad jokes are us, definitely. So let's talk about that, really. So it's really easy to look at AI and go, where do I start? There are, in terms of, if you ask Microsoft how many Copilots are available, there was a point, I think there was like 150 different Copilots, and they're all versions of AI that are tuned for the kind of tool that they're sat inside. So, for example, there's a Copilot for PowerPoint and a Copilot for Word. And when you're in Azure, for example, dealing with, sort of virtual machines and other computer bits and bobs, there's an Azure specific for that and Copilot specific for that Azure. So you're like, okay, where do I start? The trick is to start small and to pick one area that is causing you pain. I mean, fundamentally, AI is very smart and very clever, but we're still talking about the implementation of technology. And any implementation of technology, if you try and go too large, you will probably end up biting off more than you can deal with. And my colleague over there, James, is always talking about working smart and being able to fail fast, and the concept of a minimum viable product or an MVP. And that might have been something that people on the call have heard when they've been talking to consultants or technical people. And it's really important to be able to do that. So, a big chunk of what we do when we're doing Power Platform is trying to make sure that, we don't chew off too much at one go, and we try and release small sections, and we make sure that those small sections all understand how they work. So it's really, really important to when you're starting out with these things to not to go too large. don't overlook what you already might have, for example. So we mentioned this earlier, didn't we, Andrew? It might be that you have a number of tools already available to you if you're part of Microsoft 365.
Yeah, very much so. And I think some of the Microsoft licensing can give there's a lot to unpack in the licensing side of this, and certainly more that than we have time for to cover today. But certainly some of your Microsoft licenses should hopefully provide some of the key features that we're talking about. We were talking earlier, Phil, about agents. This concept of AI agents, which you can nest in various different places, but mostly they're a good use for agents on a portal, for example, which is your organization would have direct contact with clients and end users and stuff and donors through a portal. Now, seating a bot on there requires it to be licensed with these AI builder credits, which you can actually accrue through various other licenses as opposed to just buying them outright. And I was talking to a couple of clients earlier, and I made the case that I saw in 2 recent views of a Microsoft customer's tenant. So I went into the partner center for Microsoft, which is how lots of partners get into Microsoft tenants without having to be licensed and obviously getting charged, just to help with looking at licenses, look at what the settings and things are. And I noticed that in the 2 tenants that I looked at, both had quite a large number of AI builder credits were assigned to the tenant but had not been used, and that's probably either down to the fact they don't have a bot that is required, or they may not know that actually they need a bot or an agent, or they can have a bot or an agent and use the credits
that are available to them, right?
Yeah, to track off each message, and a message obviously is basically a credit. So there's a lot of subject matter in the licensing which we can definitely take away. Basically, have a look at what you have now, and if you don't know what you don't know, reach out, and we can provide, as we do with all of our clients, a sort of a quick free of charge review of all your licensing on the estate in terms of Dynamics, and Microsoft 365 and Azure, and work out how we might be able to get gains on what you currently have but don't utilize, or how you can take new product and do it at a fraction of the cost with any attached options and opportunities.
Going back to where we were talking about not being overwhelmed. Before diving into sort of driving some of your AI, it's certainly worth thinking about your data. So making sure that it's clean and well organized. And what does that mean? What that's really talking about is the fact that it might be you have a number of SharePoint sites, and if you're going to allow your AI to look at SharePoint sites, that you need to make sure that it's not going to find something that you potentially as a user might have access to, and accidentally give that access. There are a number of tools that allow you to check that. It's definitely probably something where having a chat with a partner would be quite useful in order to make sure that your AI is going to be working with the right data sets rather than potentially looking at some nonsense that it shouldn't. Last but not least, keep it ethical and keep it human first. You've got people in your organization, they're very powerful, they've got a lot of knowledge, and as you start into an AI journey, make sure that they're in the forefront of your mind. I think it's really important that sort of your AI is going to work with people. It's not going to do the entirety of the jobs themselves, and make sure that people are involved in the decision making, and that you end up with trust. AI is not about replacing people. It's about empowering them to focus on what really matters, and hopefully in a very cheesy way, this to be sort of hopefully better versions of themselves. So
the last part there really is, I think you touched on it earlier, Phil, is with the minimal, there's a lot of organizations out there that have minimal tech resources. Obviously, first of all, use the ones that you do have, but where there are minimal tech resources, what's the realistic first step? Is it to ask AI, what should I do? Which is an interesting
absolutely
interesting question.
That's a perfectly valid starting point.
And perhaps augment with a conversation with your Microsoft partner or your Dynamics partner.
Yeah, I think that would be a great way to go. Like I say, remember that, start small. You've probably got a number of technology solutions already in place. Make sure that if you're going to bring a new technology on board, make sure it fits those technologies. it's why it's so great working within the Microsoft stack. All this stuff fits together in such a beautiful way that, you know, one part talks to another, and it just makes life a lot easier. We've got a thing on the screen there which says start with MVP, buzzword bingo. That's minimum viable product. You know, it's like any new technology implementation. Try and start small. Try and make sure that you can fail fast, and then build out your project accordingly. Yeah, and then we discussed cost probably several times during this chat, you know, and make sure that you're going to be able to resource your project. And of course, any issues that you have along the way, or even before then, do get in touch, and we're more than happy to help with a lot of this stuff.
But yes, I think there are some questions that we haven't had a chance to answer today, and there are some good questions that we will take away. The crux of it is that, you know, we really appreciate the time that you spent with us today, and hopefully you've gained some insight. We'll send out the deck and the SKUs of certain example costs for certain Microsoft Copilot options with the NFP pricing on it. And by all means, reach out to us and the team here at Formers Pro with any questions, big or small. And we'll do our best to answer it. And most cases, obviously, that, you know, these webinars are trying to cover all bases where we can within the time limit. Clearly, lots of your charities are not all bases and are not generic, so they're all use cases and they're all unique in their own way. So we'd like to treat everyone the same. So by all means, give us that chance and reach out. Incidentally, there's information available on previous webinars that we've had. There was a question earlier which we didn't address, which was about the free AI tools. There was could we send a link to the date and time of those free AI tool webinars? Lots of webinars are available through our LinkedIn page. There's also a YouTube channel that has these webinars on there as well.
I've got quite an interesting question here for you, Phil. If we use AI for impact measurement and reporting, how do we use the tool without releasing the data into generative AI? Which is a good point that a lot of NFPs worry about, because obviously they handle quite sensitive data, some of them.
That's right. So if you're using Copilot, your data is not used or stored against the LLM. That's the underlying chat model, if you like. It's not used or stored anywhere along that route. So if you're using ChatGPT, it may well be used and sent out to the LLM and used as part of its training, for example. However, Microsoft very specifically and very clearly illustrate in all of their architecture documents that any of your data is not being used to train any models and is not being sent out onto the wild west that is the internet.
There's another one from Mike, actually. Is there a simple workflow example? And of course, this webinar didn't include any demonstrations because we thought that more of an open chat would be a good call. But yes, is there a workflow example that can be shared to further appreciate the value AI offers and how it relates to fundraising?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could we come up with specific examples for certain aspects of fundraising. You know, fundamentally, I would have thought customer insights journeys would be the way to go in terms of how best to do that. You could implement aspects of customer insights, if you like, by rolling your own workflows or processes within Power Automate. But I would have thought it would be, you know, you'd end up taking on a certain amount of work yourself then. And like I say, the tooling exists within customer insights, and that would be the best way to come up with those two sides of the coin effectively. There's a lot of power there. That's what it's designed to do, and it's created to operate at scale. So
I guess it leaves me to thank everyone for their time today, and we've really enjoyed spending time with you, and hopefully unpacked some good stuff. If you have any questions, please get in touch. Otherwise, we will send this out, and we will bid you a very enjoyable rest of your day.
Great stuff. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.